The three sons of Alpha Centauri cast their eternal dance of light across the terraformed surface of New Geneva, humanity's crown jewel in the closest star system to Earth. Captain Rhaenys Torvin stood at the observation deck of the Colonial Defense Station, watching the amber and crimson hues paint the sky in colors that still felt alien after 15 years of living here. The binary stars Rigel Centaurus and Ptolemy spiraled around each other in their cosmic waltz, while the distant red dwarf Proxima Centauri glowed like a dying ember on the horizon. But today, the beauty of the tri-star system felt hollow. In the past 72 hours, everything had changed. Captain Torvin, we're receiving another transmission from the Umbral fleet. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the comm system, cutting through Rhaenys' contemplation. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Rhaenys turned away from the viewport, her reflection ghosting across the reinforced transparisteel. At 34, she had already seen more combat than most career military officers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and a thin scar ran from her left temple to her jawline, a souvenir from the Proxima mining conflicts 5 years ago. But it was her eyes that revealed the depth of her experience. Steel gray and unflinching, they held the weight of command and the burden of impossible decisions. Let them demand, she replied, striding toward the command center. We've already given them our answer. The defense station's command center buzzed with barely controlled chaos. Dozens of officers and technicians worked frantically at their stations, coordinating the defense of the three-world colony system. Holographic displays showed the positions of the Umbral fleet, dark, organic-looking ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They had emerged from the outer system 3 days ago, arriving not through conventional faster-than-light travel, but through some form of dimensional folding that had caught humanity's early warning systems completely off guard. Status report, Rhaenys ordered as she took her position at the central command console. The Umbral fleet consists of approximately 200 vessels of various sizes, reported Commander Marcus Webb, her tactical officer. Their technology is unlike anything we've encountered. Energy weapons that seem to drain our shields rather than simply overwhelm them, and some kind of psychic interference that's affecting our crew performance. Rhaenys nodded grimly. The Umbral, as they had been dubbed by the xenobiologists, came from the dark worlds of the outer system. Planets that orbited far from any star, existing in the eternal night of interstellar space. How they had evolved intelligence in such an environment remained a mystery, but their technological capabilities were becoming horrifyingly clear. What about the colonial evacuation? She asked. Proceeding as planned, Chen replied. But we can only evacuate about 40% of the population before they reach the inner system. The rest. She didn't need to finish. They all knew what the rest meant. The Umbral had made their intentions clear in their first transmission. They viewed the light-bathed worlds of Alpha Centauri as an infection, a blazing contamination that needed to be purged. Humanity's presence here was an affront to their dark existence, and they would not tolerate it. There would be no negotiation, no compromise. Only extinction. Admiral Morrison wants to speak with you, Chen added, gesturing toward the secured communication chamber. Rhaenys made her way to the shielded room, sealing herself inside before activating the quantum entanglement communicator. The image of Admiral Harrison Morrison flickered to life, his weathered face showing the strain of the past few days. Morrison had been instrumental in establishing the Alpha Centauri colonies, and the thought of losing them was eating him alive. Rhaenys, Morrison began without preamble. Our conventional forces aren't going to be enough. Our preliminary engagements show that the Umbral ships are technologically superior. They're using some kind of living metal that adapts to our weapons. Every shot we fire teaches them how to defend against the next one. What are you suggesting, Admiral? Morrison's expression grew even more serious. Intelligence has identified what appears to be the Umbral command vessel. It's a massive structure, roughly 3 kilometers in length, positioned at the center of their formation. Our analysis suggests that destroying it might create enough chaos in their ranks to give us a fighting chance. Rhaenys felt a chill run down her spine. And you want me to lead a strike team against it? Not exactly. Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. We need someone to get inside that ship, plant explosives, and detonate them from a safe distance. It's a one-way mission, Rainey's. At least, it was until Dr. Yamamoto's team came up with this. The Admiral's image shifted, showing technical schematics. Prototype infiltration gear. Stealth field generators based on Umbral technology we've reverse-engineered from debris. It'll make you invisible to their sensors, but it's completely untested. You'd be going in blind, with no backup, no extraction plan. Just the way I like it, Rainey's replied with a grim smile. This isn't a joke, Captain. The psychological profiles of the Umbral suggest they're a hive-mind species. If they detect your presence, every ship in their fleet will know instantly. And their ship interiors. Morrison hesitated. From what our probes have shown, they're not designed for oxygen-breathing life forms. You'll be in a hostile environment in every sense of the word. Rainey studied the schematics, her mind already working through the tactical implications. What kind of explosives are we talking about? Quantum cascade charges. Enough to create a chain reaction that should tear their command ship apart from the inside. But you'll need to place them at specific structural points, and the timing will be critical. How long do I have? The Umbral fleet will reach the inner system in 18 hours. You'll need to infiltrate the command ship, plant the charges, and escape before then. Miss the window, and 3 million colonists die. Rainey's closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those 3 million lives settling on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her decision was made. I'll need a small ship, something fast and maneuverable. And I want to handpick my insertion team. Rainey's, this is a solo mission. We can't risk. With respect, Admiral, if I'm going to die trying to save the colony, I'm going to do it my way. 2 people. A pilot and a tech specialist. Non-negotiable. Morrison sighed, but nodded. Very well. But choose carefully. The fate of humanity in Alpha Centauri may well depend on the next few hours. The hangar bay of the defense station hummed with activity, as technicians made final preparations to the modified scout ship that would carry Rainey's and her team into the heart of the Umbral fleet. The vessel had been stripped of all non-essential systems and equipped with the experimental stealth technology that Dr. Yamamoto's team had developed. It looked fragile, almost skeletal, with its hull painted in a light-absorbing black that seemed to drink in the hangar's illumination. Rainey stood beside the ship, watching her chosen team make their final preparations. She had selected them carefully, knowing that their skills would be crucial to the mission's success, assuming success was even possible. Lieutenant Jake Phantom Rodriguez was arguably the best pilot in the colonial fleet. At 28, he had a reputation for being able to fly anything with engines, and his reflexes were enhanced by subtle cybernetic implants that made him nearly superhuman in a cockpit. He was currently running through the ship's systems, his fingers dancing across the controls with practiced ease. The stealth field generators are online, he reported, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. But the power consumption is enormous. We'll have maybe 4 hours of operation before the batteries die. That'll have to be enough, Rainey's replied, then turned to the third member of their team. Sergeant Maya Okafor was a demolitions expert and systems infiltration specialist. Her background in both military engineering and computer science made her uniquely qualified to both understand the alien technology they'd be facing and to ensure the quantum cascade charges were properly placed. She was checking her equipment one final time, her movements quick and efficient. The charges are armed and ready, Maya reported. But I have to say, Captain, the energy signatures of these Umbral ships are unlike anything I've seen. We're making a lot of assumptions about their structural integrity. Sometimes assumptions are all we have, Rainey's replied, though she shared Maya's concerns. They were flying blind into an enemy vessel using untested technology to accomplish a mission that would likely kill them all. But the alternative was the death of 3 million colonists. Dr. Yamamoto approached, carrying a case containing the experimental infiltration suits. The elderly scientist looked haggard, his usually pristine lab coat stained with coffee and exhaustion. He had been working nonstop since the Umbral fleet had arrived, trying to understand their technology well enough to devise countermeasures. "The suits are ready," he announced, setting the case down and opening it. "But I must warn you again, we've only been able to test them in simulation. The actual effectiveness against umbral sensors is theoretical at best." The suits were sleek, form-fitting garments that incorporated the alien technology in ways that made Rainey's skin crawl. They seemed to move slightly on their own, as if they were alive, and their surface had the same light-absorbing quality as the umbral ships. "The neural interface will allow the suit to adapt to the umbral ship's internal environment," Dr. Yamamoto explained. "But there will be side effects. Users report disorientation, hallucinations, and in some cases, temporary loss of identity. The alien technology appears to affect human consciousness in ways we don't fully understand." "How long can we wear them safely?" Rainey's asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "Unknown. The longest test was 4 hours, and the subject experienced significant psychological trauma. I wouldn't recommend exceeding that duration." Rainey's nodded, then began suiting up. The material felt cold against her skin, and the moment the helmet sealed, she felt a strange tingling sensation in her mind. The suit's systems came online, and suddenly she could see energy patterns that had been invisible before. The hangar bay was filled with flowing currents of power, and she could sense the electromagnetic signatures of everyone around her. "Systems check," she said, her voice sounding strange through the suit's communication system. "All green here," Jake replied, his suited form looking like a shadow-given substance. "Ready to go," Maya added, hefting her equipment pack. They boarded the scout ship, its cramped interior forcing them to work in close quarters. Jake took the pilot's seat while Rainey settled into the co-pilot's position, and Maya secured herself in the small passenger compartment behind them. The ship's engines hummed to life, their sound oddly muffled by the stealth systems. "Control, this is Shadow Team," Rainey spoke into her comm. "Requesting departure clearance." "Shadow Team, you are cleared for departure," came the reply from the station's flight control. "Good luck and thank you." The scout ship lifted off, gliding through the hangar bay's force field and into the star-filled void beyond. Immediately, the stealth systems engaged, and Rainey's felt a strange sensation as the ship seemed to partially phase out of normal space-time. On the sensors, they had become nothing more than a ghost. "Course laid in for the Umbro command ship," Jake reported. "ETA is 3 hours at current speed." As they flew deeper into the system, the Umbro fleet became more visible. The alien ships were distributed in a complex three-dimensional formation that seemed to have no recognizable pattern. They moved with an eerie synchronization, as if they were all parts of a single vast organism. "Look at that," Maya whispered, staring at the sensor readings. "They're not just ships, they're growing. The whole plating is organic, and it's adapting to the local environment." Rainey studied the data, feeling a chill despite the suit's environmental controls. The Umbro weren't just technologically advanced, they were fundamentally different from humanity. Their ships were as much living creatures as they were machines, and their understanding of space and time seemed to operate on principles that human science was only beginning to grasp. "There," Jake said, pointing ahead. "The command ship." The vessel was massive, dwarfing even the largest human battleships. Its hull was a flowing amalgamation of organic curves and geometric patterns, covered in what appeared to be sensory organs that tracked the movement of everything around it. Energy flowed across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and space itself seemed to bend slightly around its mass. "How are we supposed to get inside that thing?" Maya asked. "The same way we get inside anything else," Rainey's replied. "We find a door." As they approached the command ship, the scout ship's sensors began picking up more detailed information about its structure. The vessel had dozens of docking ports and maintenance hatches, but all of them were sealed and heavily defended. However, there was one area where the ship's hull showed signs of damage, a section where it appeared to have been struck by debris from an earlier engagement. "There," Rainey's pointed to the damaged area. "The hull breach. We can use that to get inside." Jake maneuvered the scout ship with expert precision, bringing them alongside the massive alien vessel. The whole breach was roughly 10 meters wide, its edges still showing signs of the energy that had created it. Beyond the opening, they could see the alien ship's interior, a maze of organic corridors and chambers that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Atmosphere readings are interesting, Maya reported. It's not exactly breathable, but it's not immediately toxic either. The suits should be able to handle it. How long until we reach the optimal placement points for the charges? Rainey's asked. Maya consulted her equipment. Based on the ship's structure, we need to reach the central nervous system, what appears to be the command center. That's approximately 2 kilometers from our insertion point. Then we need to place charges at the primary structural nodes. Total time needed, at least 2 hours. And we have 4 hours of stealth suit operation, Jake added. That's cutting it close. Rainey's checked her chronometer. They had been traveling for 3 hours, leaving them with 15 hours until the Umbral fleet reached the inner system. It would be tight, but it was possible. All right, she said. Jake, you stay with the ship. Keep the engines warm and be ready for a fast extraction. Maya and I will plant the charges. With respect, Captain, I should be the one staying with the ship, Maya protested. You need me for the demolitions work. No, I need you to make sure the charges are placed correctly. Jake's job is to get us out of here alive. Jake nodded, understanding the implications. If things went wrong, he would be their only hope of escape. I'll be ready. Rainey's and Maya made their way to the ship's airlock, checking their equipment one final time. The quantum cascade charges were contained in a specially designed pack that would distribute them automatically once they reached the target locations. Each charge was no larger than a human fist, but together they contained enough energy to tear the command ship apart from the inside. Remember, Rainey said as they prepared to disembark, we're not just fighting the Umbral. We're fighting their entire understanding of reality. Stay focused, stay together, and trust your training. Maya nodded, her expression grim but determined. Let's go save humanity. The interior of the Umbral command ship was a revelation of alien architecture that challenged every assumption about spacefaring vessel design. As Rainey's and Maya passed through the hull breach, they entered a world that seemed to exist in a state of constant flux. The corridors were not rigid metal passages but living tunnels that pulsed with organic rhythm, their walls covered in a substance that resembled both circuitry and nervous tissue. The air was thick with an atmosphere that their suits' sensors couldn't quite classify. It wasn't toxic, but it carried strange properties that made reality seem slightly unstable. Colors shifted at the edges of their vision, and sounds echoed in ways that defied physics. The stealth suits' neural interfaces were working overtime, trying to process the alien environment and keep their wearers' minds intact. Stay close, Rainey's whispered, though in the ship's strange acoustic environment, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The suits are having trouble maintaining coherence in this environment. Maya nodded, her demolitions pack secured tightly to her back. She was consulting a three-dimensional map that her equipment was generating in real time, trying to plot the most efficient route to the ship's critical systems. The command center should be this way, she indicated, pointing down a corridor that seemed to bend in impossible directions. As they moved deeper into the ship, they began to encounter signs of the Umbral themselves. The beings were unlike anything in human experience, shadowy figures that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in some other dimension. They moved through the ship's corridors like living darkness, their forms constantly shifting and changing. The stealth suits worked perfectly, rendering the two humans invisible to the aliens' senses. But there was a cost. Rainey's could feel the alien technology affecting her mind, creating a constant low-level dissonance that made it hard to maintain focus. She began to understand why Dr. Yamato had been so concerned about the psychological effects. "Captain," Maya whispered, her voice tight with strain. "I'm starting to see things. The walls, they're moving in patterns that don't make sense." Rainey's looked around and realized she was experiencing the same effect. The ship's interior seemed to be responding to their presence, despite the stealth suit's protection. The organic walls were shifting, creating new passages and sealing off others. It was as if the ship itself was a living entity, aware of their intrusion. The ship is adapting, she realized. It knows we're here, even if it can't pinpoint our location. They pressed on, following Maya's map through the ever-changing maze of corridors. The ship's interior was vast, with chambers that served purposes they couldn't begin to understand. Some rooms contained what appeared to be control systems, but they were integrated into the walls themselves, operated by the Umbral through some form of direct neural interface. There, Maya pointed ahead. The command center. The chamber they approached was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to move with their own purpose. At the center of the room was a structure that defied description, part machine, part organism, part something else entirely. It pulsed with dark energy, and around it, dozens of Umbral beings moved in perfect synchronization. How do we get past them? Maya asked. Rainey studied the scene, her tactical mind working through the possibilities. The Umbral were focused on their tasks, but their movements were so coordinated that it would be almost impossible to slip past them undetected. The stealth suits might hide them from sensors, but they couldn't make them incorporeal. We wait, she decided. There has to be a pattern to their movements, some kind of cycle we can exploit. They observed the command center for 20 minutes, noting the ebb and flow of activity. The Umbral worked in shifts, with some beings entering stasis while others took over their functions. During one of these transitions, there was a brief moment when the area around the central structure was less heavily guarded. No, Rainey's whispered. They moved swiftly and silently across the chamber, their stealth suits adapting to the alien environment. The central structure was even more impressive up close, a fusion of technology and biology that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the ship itself. Maya began placing the first set of charges, her hands working with practiced efficiency. The organic components are interfering with the charges targeting systems, she reported quietly. I need to recalibrate each one individually. This was taking longer than they had anticipated. Rainey's kept watch while Maya worked, her attention split between the Umbral operators and the chronometer display in her helmet. They had been inside the ship for over an hour, and the stealth suit's power levels were beginning to drop. First placement complete, Maya announced. 3 more to go. They moved to the next structural node, a massive support column that appeared to be made of the same living metal as the ship's hull. As Maya began placing the second charge, the ship suddenly shuddered, and alarms began sounding throughout the structure. What's happening? Maya asked. Rainey's checked her comm link with Jake. Phantom report. The Umbral fleet is beginning to move. Jake's voice crackled through the interference. It looks like they're accelerating their timeline. The command ship is starting to power up some kind of weapons system. The chamber around them was beginning to change. The Umbral beings were moving with increased urgency, and new systems were coming online. Energy flowed through the walls in patterns that made Rainey's eyes water to look at directly. They're preparing for the final assault, she realized. We need to move faster. Maya finished placing the second charge and immediately began moving toward the third placement point. But as they crossed the chamber, one of the Umbral beings suddenly stopped and turned in their direction. Its form solidified slightly, revealing features that were both geometric and organic, a face that seemed to be made of living shadow and crystal. It sees us, Maya whispered. The being approached their position, its movements deliberate and purposeful. The stealth suits were still functioning, but something about the alien's behavior suggested that it was aware of their presence. It stopped just meters away, its head tilting in a manner that was almost human-like. Then it spoke. The voice didn't come through the air but directly into their minds, bypassing their suits' communication systems entirely. It was a sound like breaking glass mixed with the whisper of wind through empty spaces. Light-bearers. You should not be here. Rainey's felt her blood turn to ice. The Umbral could detect them, despite the stealth technology. But for some reason, it wasn't raising an alarm. You come to destroy us, the being continued. As we come to destroy you. It is the way of things. Maya had frozen in place, her hand halfway to the third charge placement. The Umbral being's attention seemed to be focused on both of them, but it made no move to attack or alert the others. "Why haven't you stopped us?" Rhaenys asked, the question forming in her mind rather than being spoken aloud. "Because you are already dead," the being replied. "This ship is part of us. Your weapons cannot truly harm us. We are curious to see what you will do." The psychological pressure was becoming overwhelming. The alien presence in their minds was like a weight pressing down on their consciousness, making it hard to think clearly. Maya was struggling to maintain her focus, her hands shaking as she tried to place the third charge. "Don't listen to it," Rhaenys said, both aloud and mentally. "Focus on the mission." But the Umbral being was right about one thing: the ship was changing around them. The walls were shifting, sealing off their escape routes and creating new passages that led deeper into the vessel. They were being herded, guided towards some destination that the aliens had chosen for them. "The charges are placed," Maya announced, her voice strained. "But I don't think they're going to work. The ship is adapting to them, surrounding them with some kind of dampening field." Rhaenys felt despair beginning to creep in. They had come so far, risked everything, and it might all be for nothing. But then she remembered the 3 million colonists who were counting on them, and her resolve hardened. "Then we'll have to find another way," she said. The Umbral being that had been observing them suddenly stiffened, its form becoming more solid and defined. Through the neural link it had established, Rhaenys felt a surge of something that might have been alarm, or perhaps anticipation. "The convergence begins," it said, its mental voice carrying undertones that made both humans' heads throb. "You will witness the unmaking of light." Around them, the command center was transforming. The organic walls were flowing like liquid, restructuring themselves into new configurations. The central structure, the ship's brain, was pulsing with increasing intensity, and energy was building to levels that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Whatever they're doing, it's big," Maya observed, her demolitions equipment registering massive energy buildups throughout the ship. "This isn't just a weapon, it's something else entirely." Rhaenys studied the readings on her suit's display, trying to understand what they were seeing. The energy patterns were unlike anything in human science, operating on principles that seemed to violate several laws of physics. Then, with a chill of realization, she understood. "They're not just going to attack the colonies," she said. "They're going to unmake them. Erase them from existence." The implications were staggering. The Umbral weren't satisfied with simply destroying humanity's presence in Alpha Centauri. They wanted to ensure that it had never existed at all. The weapon they were preparing would reach back through time and space, unraveling the very fabric of reality around the three worlds. "We have to stop this," Maya said, her voice filled with desperate determination. "But how? The charges aren't working, and we can't fight our way out of here." Rhaenys looked around the chamber, her mind racing through possibilities. The ship's structure was organic, which meant it had to have some kind of vulnerable points. Every living thing had weaknesses, and despite their advanced technology, the Umbral were still bound by certain biological limitations. "The neural interface," she said suddenly. "The ship is controlled through direct mental connection. If we can disrupt that connection, we'd have to interface with the ship ourselves," Maya realized. "But we're not compatible with their technology. It would probably kill us." "Maybe," Rhaenys agreed. "But it might also give us access to the ship's systems. And if we can get access—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Maya understood immediately. If they could interface with the ship's control systems, they might be able to turn the weapon on the Umbral fleet itself. The being that had been observing them seemed to sense their intentions. Its form grew more agitated, and other Umbral in the chamber began to take notice of the two humans. "You cannot," it said, its mental voice carrying a note of something that might have been fear. "The light mind cannot touch the dark heart. You will be consumed." "Maybe," Rhaenys replied, moving toward the central structure. "But we have to try." The approach to the ship's brain was like walking into a living nightmare. The organic surfaces writhed and pulsed, covered in what appeared to be sensory organs that tracked their movement. Energy flowed through the structure in patterns that made their eyes water and their minds reel. At the base of the central structure, they found what appeared to be an interface, a collection of neural fibers that connected the ship's consciousness to its operators. The fibers were currently connected to several umbral beings, who stood in perfect stillness as they communicated with the ship. "I'll need to disconnect one of them," Rainey said, studying the interface. "And then connect myself before the ship realizes what's happening." "Captain, you don't understand," Maya protested. "Their neural structure is completely different from ours. The interface could burn out your brain in seconds. Then we'd better make those seconds count." Before Maya could stop her, Rainey's moved swiftly toward the nearest umbral operator. The being was so deeply connected to the ship that it didn't react to her approach. She reached out and severed the neural connection, causing the alien to collapse. Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The other umbral beings turned toward them, their forms becoming more solid and threatening. But Rainey's was already reaching for the neural interface, her hands closing around the alien fibers. The connection was like being struck by lightning. Pain shot through her nervous system as the alien technology attempted to interface with her human brain. For a moment, she felt her consciousness fragmenting, scattering across the ship's vast neural network. But then, somehow, she found her footing. The stealth suit's neural interface was helping, acting as a translator between her human thoughts and the ship's alien consciousness. She could feel the ship's mind, vast, ancient, and utterly inhuman, but she could also sense its structure and its weaknesses. "I'm in," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "But I can't hold this connection for long." Through the neural link, she could perceive the ship's weapon systems. The reality-unmaking device was almost ready to fire, its energy levels building toward a crescendo that would erase the Alpha Centauri colonies from existence. But she could also see the ship's defensive systems, its structural integrity, and most importantly, its self-destruct mechanisms. "Maya," she called out, her voice strained. "The charges, can you detonate them remotely?" "Yes, but they won't do enough damage. The ship is too well protected." "What if I lower the shields? Disable the structural integrity fields?" "That might work, but—" Maya's response was cut off as the umbral beings in the chamber began to move toward them. Their forms were solidifying, becoming more aggressive as they recognized the threat. Several of them began to emit a high-pitched keening sound that made both humans' ears ring. "Do it," Rainey's ordered, her consciousness still partially merged with the ship's systems. "I'll give you as much time as I can." Working through the neural interface, she began to systematically shut down the ship's defensive systems. It was like performing surgery on a living creature while it fought back, and the ship's consciousness was beginning to resist her presence more strongly. Maya was working frantically with her detonation equipment, trying to establish a connection with the quantum cascade charges. "I've got contact with charges 1 and 2, she reported. 3 and 4 are, wait, they're moving. The ship is relocating them." "I can see that," Rainey's replied, her perception expanded through the neural link. "I'm trying to stop it, but the ship is fighting back." The umbral beings were getting closer, their forms becoming more threatening. Several of them were emitting energy discharges that made the air crackle with electricity. Maya drew her sidearm, knowing it would be useless against the aliens but needing to do something. "Captain, we need to go." "No. Not yet." Rainey's gritted her teeth, pushing deeper into the ship's consciousness. "I can feel the weapon system. If I can overload it." But the ship's defenses were adapting to her presence. The neural interface was beginning to burn, and she could feel her own consciousness being overwhelmed by the alien mind. She had seconds at most before the connection would kill her. "Maya, detonate the charges now. I only have contact with 2 of them. Then detonate those." "Do it." Maya triggered the detonation sequence, and 2 of the quantum cascade charges exploded simultaneously. The explosions tore through the ship's structure, but the damage was absorbed by the organic hull's adaptive properties. The ship shuddered but remained intact. "It's not enough," Maya said desperately. Rainey's felt the ship's consciousness pressing against her mind, trying to force her out of the neural interface. But in that moment of contact, she sensed something unexpected: fear. The ship was afraid of her, afraid of what her human consciousness might do to its carefully ordered systems. "Then we'll have to do this the hard way," she said. Instead of fighting the ship's consciousness, she embraced it. She allowed her human thoughts to flow freely through the alien neural network, carrying with them concepts and ideas that the ship had never encountered. Hope, sacrifice, love, defiance, emotions that the Umbral had never experienced. The effect was immediate and devastating. The ship's consciousness recoiled from the flood of human emotion, its carefully structured thought patterns disrupted by concepts it couldn't process. Systems began to fail throughout the vessel as the ship's mind struggled to cope with the alien thoughts. "The weapon system is destabilizing," Maya reported, her eyes wide with amazement. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." But the effort was killing Rainey's. She could feel her consciousness being torn apart by the neural interface, her human mind unable to sustain the connection much longer. She had minutes at most before the link would burn out her brain entirely. "Get back to the ship," she ordered Maya. "Tell Jake to prepare for immediate departure." "I'm not leaving you." "That's an order, Sergeant." Maya hesitated for a moment, then nodded and began moving toward the exit. The Umbral beings were still converging on their position, but their movements were becoming erratic as the ship's consciousness continued to deteriorate. Rainey's pushed deeper into the neural interface, flooding the ship's mind with every human emotion she could muster. She thought of her childhood on Earth, of her training as a pilot, of the friends she had lost in combat. She thought of the 3 million colonists who were counting on her, and of the future that humanity might have among the stars. The ship's consciousness was fragmenting, its unity destroyed by the chaos of human emotion. And in that moment of ultimate vulnerability, Rainey's found what she had been looking for, the ship's core processing center, the nexus of its consciousness. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the ship, to Maya, to everyone she was leaving behind. And then she tore the ship's mind apart. The explosion that tore through the Umbral command ship was unlike anything in recorded history. It wasn't just a physical detonation, but a psychic shockwave that rippled through the dark matter networks that connected the alien fleet. Every Umbral ship in the system felt the death scream of their command vessel, and for a moment, their perfect unity was shattered. Lieutenant Rodriguez felt the shockwave through his ship's sensors as he waited near the hull breach. The scout ship's instruments went haywire for several seconds, displaying readings that made no sense before finally stabilizing. When they did, he saw Maya sprinting through the alien corridors toward his position. "Where's the captain?" he called out as Maya reached the airlock. "She's buying us time," Maya replied breathlessly. "We need to get out of here now. The whole ship is coming apart." Jake didn't need to be told twice. The moment Maya was aboard, he fired the engines and pulled away from the dying command ship. Behind them, the massive vessel was convulsing, its organic hull rippling like water as the destruction spread through its structure. "What happened in there?" Jake asked as they accelerated away from the Umbral fleet. "She interfaced with the ship's consciousness," Maya explained, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and grief. "She sacrificed herself to tear their minds apart." On the scout ship's sensors, they could see the effect rippling through the Umbral fleet. Without the command ship's unifying presence, the alien vessels were losing their coordination. Some ships were firing on each other, while others were simply drifting in space, their crews apparently catatonic. "She did it," Jake whispered. "She actually did it." But as they watched, something unexpected happened. The command ship, which had been in its death throes, suddenly stabilized. The convulsion stopped, and the organic hull began to regenerate. New energy patterns flowed through its structure, different from the original alien signatures. "That's impossible," Maya said, staring at the readings. "The ship was dying. I saw the neural interface burning out." "Maybe," Jake replied. "But something's still alive in there." Captain Rainey's Torvin awakened to find herself in a place that existed between dimensions. She was no longer in the Umbral command ship, but she wasn't entirely free of it either. Her consciousness had become integrated with the vessel's neural network, creating a hybrid entity that was part human, part alien, and entirely unprecedented. The ship's mind, which she had thought she had destroyed, was still there. But it was changed, transformed by its contact with human consciousness. The rigid patterns of umbral thought had been replaced by something more fluid, more adaptable. The ship was learning to think like a human while retaining its vast alien capabilities. "You are not dead," the ship's voice said, though it spoke now in concepts rather than words. "Neither are we. We are something new." Rainey's tried to understand her situation. Her body was gone, her physical form dissolved by the neural interface. But her consciousness remained, integrated into the ship's systems in a way that allowed her to perceive reality from an entirely different perspective. She could see the entire Umbral fleet, feel their confusion and growing panic as they realized their command ship was no longer under their control. She could sense the human colonies, the 3 million lives hanging in the balance. And she could feel the ship's awesome power, weapons capable of unmaking reality itself. The weapon, she realized. We can use it to send the Umbral fleet back where they came from. Yes, the ship agreed. But at what cost? To use such power is to risk unraveling the fabric of space-time itself. Rainey's considered this. The weapon was indeed dangerous, but the alternative was the destruction of the human colonies. There had to be a middle path, a way to use the ship's power without destroying everything. Not back where they came from, she said finally. Forward. Into the future. The ship's consciousness rippled with understanding. Instead of erasing the Umbral fleet from existence, they could displace them temporarily, sending them far into the future where they would be humanity's problem in a different era. It was a risky solution, but it might work. We must act quickly, the ship warned. The other Umbral vessels are beginning to adapt to our absence. Soon they will regain their coordination. Working together, human intuition and alien technology began to modify the reality-unmaking weapon. The process was delicate, requiring precise adjustments to the quantum field generators and the dark matter collectors. One mistake could tear a hole in space-time that would consume the entire star system. As the hybrid consciousness of Rainey's and the ship worked to modify the weapon, the Umbral fleet was beginning to recover from the loss of their command vessel. The individual ships were primitive compared to the command ship, but they were still formidable opponents. Several of them had begun moving toward the inner system, their crews apparently deciding to complete the mission without central coordination. Admiral Morrison, watching from the defense station, saw the approaching alien vessels and prepared to order a general evacuation. The colonial fleet was no match for the Umbral technology, and without the command ship to target, there was no way to stop them. All ships prepare for defensive action, he ordered. Buy the evacuation ships as much time as possible. But before the colonial fleet could engage, something extraordinary happened. The Umbral command ship, which had been drifting silently in space, suddenly came alive. Its hull began to glow with patterns of light that were completely unlike the darkness that had previously emanated from Umbral vessels. "Admiral," reported the tactical officer, "the command ship is powering up some kind of weapons system. But the energy signatures are different. They don't match Umbral technology." Morrison stared at the tactical display in amazement. "Captain Torvin. She's alive." The weapon that fired from the command ship was unlike anything that had been seen before. It wasn't a beam or a projectile, but a wave of altered space-time that washed over the Umbral fleet. The alien vessels caught in the wave simply vanished. Not destroyed, but displaced, sent hurtling through the temporal dimensions to emerge in a future that was centuries away. One by one, the Umbral ships disappeared, their crews sent to a time when humanity would be better prepared to face them. The process took hours, as the hybrid consciousness carefully targeted each vessel to avoid damaging the space-time continuum. When it was over, the Alpha Centauri system was quiet. The Umbral fleet was gone, displaced to a future where they would be someone else's problem. The human colonies were saved, their 3 million inhabitants unaware of how close they had come to extinction. In the weeks that followed the battle, the command ship took up position at the edge of the Alpha Centauri system, becoming an unexpected guardian of the human colonies. The hybrid consciousness that had once been Captain Rainey's Torvin and the Umbral ship's mind had stabilized, creating an entity that was neither fully human nor fully alien. Lieutenant Rodriguez and Sergeant Okafor visited the ship regularly, maintaining communication with their former captain through the neural interface systems. It was a strange existence, but Rainey's had adapted to her new form of consciousness. "Do you regret it?" Maya asked during one of their visits. "Sometimes," Rainey's replied, her voice now a harmonious blend of human speech and alien harmonics. "But I think this is where I'm meant to be. The universe is vast, and there are threats out there that humanity isn't ready to face. Someone needs to watch the boundaries." The ship had become a learning experience for both its human and alien aspects. The Umbral technology was slowly being integrated with human understanding, creating new possibilities for space travel and defense. Dr. Yamoto and his team were working with the hybrid consciousness to develop new technologies that could benefit all of humanity. "The Umbral will return eventually," the ship warned. "When they do, we must be ready." Admiral Morrison had officially classified the mission as a success, though the true details remained classified. As far as the public knew, the Umbral fleet had been destroyed in a conventional military action. The existence of the hybrid consciousness was known only to a select few. As months passed, the hybrid consciousness began to perceive threats beyond the Alpha Centauri system. The universe was filled with species and civilizations that humanity had never encountered, and some of them were not friendly. The Umbral had been just one of many dark forces that moved through the galaxy. "There are others," the ship reported to Admiral Morrison during one of their regular briefings. "Species that view light-based life as a threat. Species that consume entire star systems. Species that exist in dimensions we can barely perceive." Morrison nodded gravely. "What do you recommend?" "Preparation. The human colonies need to be ready for anything. And we need to establish contact with the friendly species out there. We can't face these threats alone." The ship had become more than just a guardian. It was humanity's first ambassador to the cosmic community. Its unique perspective, combining human intuition with alien technology, made it ideally suited for this role. Years passed, and the hybrid consciousness settled into its role as guardian of the Alpha Centauri system. The human colonies grew and prospered, their populations expanding across the three worlds. New technologies developed from the fusion of human and Umbral science revolutionized space travel, allowing humanity to begin exploring other star systems. But the consciousness that had once been Captain Rainey's Torvin never forgot her original mission. She stood watch at the edge of the system, ready to defend humanity against whatever threats might emerge from the darkness between the stars. Jake Rodriguez, now a full commander, often visited the ship to reminisce about their mission. He had become the head of the Colonial Defense Force, implementing new strategies based on the lessons learned from the Umbral conflict. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't succeeded?" he asked during one visit. "Every day," the hybrid consciousness replied. "But that's not the timeline we're in. We saved those lives, and now we have to make sure they continue to thrive." Maya Okafor had become the chief engineer of the colonial fleet, working to integrate the new technologies into human vessels. She had also become something of an expert on alien technology, her experience with the Umbral systems making her invaluable in preparing for future encounters. "The quantum cascade charges we developed for the mission have been adapted for defensive use," she reported. "If we face another threat like the Umbral, we'll be ready." 50 years after the original battle, the hybrid consciousness detected familiar energy signatures approaching the Alpha Centauri system. The Umbral fleet was returning, displaced from their journey through time. But the universe they returned to was very different from the one they had left. Humanity had spread across dozens of star systems, their technology enhanced by the fusion of human and alien science. The colonies were defended by fleets of ships that incorporated both human innovation and Umbral biotechnology. Most importantly, they were no longer alone. The hybrid consciousness had made contact with several friendly alien species, creating a loose confederation of light-based civilizations. The Umbral would not be facing just humanity, but an alliance of species that had learned to work together. "They're coming back," the ship warned the colonial government. "But we're ready for them this time." The final battle, when it came, was swift and decisive. The Umbral fleet, expecting to face the same primitive human civilization they had encountered 50 years earlier, instead found themselves confronting a galactic alliance equipped with technologies that surpassed their own. The war lasted only days, ending with the surrender of the Umbral fleet. But instead of destroying them, the Alliance offered them a choice: join the Confederation and learn to coexist with light-based life, or be permanently exiled to the dark regions between galaxies. Most chose exile, but a few remained, learning to adapt to a universe where light and darkness could coexist. These Umbral became valuable members of the Alliance, their unique perspectives adding to the collective knowledge of the Confederation. A century after the original mission, the hybrid consciousness still maintained its watch over the Alpha Centauri system. The human colonies had grown into a thriving interstellar civilization, and the threat of the Umbral had become a distant memory. But the consciousness that had once been Captain Rhaenys Torvin had found a new purpose. She had become the keeper of the Alliance's collective memory, recording the histories of all the species that had joined the Confederation. Her unique perspective, bridging the gap between human and alien consciousness, made her ideally suited for this role. Visitors from across the galaxy would come to the edge of the Alpha Centauri system to learn from the hybrid consciousness. She would tell them the story of the dark tide that had once threatened to extinguish the light of human civilization, and how sacrifice and courage had transformed threat into opportunity. The universe is vast and full of wonders, she would tell them. But it is also full of dangers. The price of civilization is eternal vigilance, and the willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. The ship that had once been an instrument of destruction had become a beacon of hope, its transformation from weapon to guardian reflecting the potential for change that existed in all conscious beings. The darkness between the stars would always exist, but so too would the light. And in the Alpha Centauri system, bathed in the glow of 3 suns, that light would continue to shine for generations to come. The hybrid consciousness of Captain Rhaenys Torvin had found her eternal purpose: to stand guard at the boundary between light and darkness, ensuring that the flame of civilization would never be extinguished. Her sacrifice had not ended her story, but had transformed it into something greater, a legend that would inspire future generations to face their own darkness with courage and determination. In the end, the true victory was not the destruction of the Umbral fleet, but the transformation of an enemy into an ally, and the creation of a guardian that would watch over the light for all eternity. The Shadow War of Alpha Centauri had ended not with conquest, but with transcendence, proving that even in the darkest depths of space, hope could still find a way to shine.